Hi, Lucas. What was your first computer?
My first computer, I think, was an 8286.
Oh,
I'm not sure anymore, but it was a Unisys system from my dad.
okay. So you're that young. What you did with the computer?
Well, my dad bought it for me so I wouldn't break his. I was just breaking his computer all the time, trying commands like format, what
Oh,
does format do? You
how
know the
you knew
thing.
about format?
From a kid.
So how you found out about format? Just you
I
listened to
just
all the
tried
commands?
everything I could. I mean, there was a MS-DOS system, and you could try some commands, and then suddenly I found this directory where all the commands were in, and I tried them one by one, and then my dad didn't like that.
Okay. So it means it's a good strategy if you would like to have a new computer, try everything on your dad's computer, and you probably get new one, right?
Exactly. So I'm already prepared when my own kids try these kind of things.
Yeah, but there are no commands on the iPads. That's the problem.
Yes, yeah, right.
So what was your first constructive command or program you wrote on the Unisys box?
Well, at some point I discovered, and this was really a great idea from Microsoft at the time, that there was QBasic installed with every
Mhm.
Microsoft DOS installation. So with QBasic, I started programming actually. I self-taught myself QBasic. I think I was 12 or something like that.
Mhm.
And I don't know if it's constructive, but I just tried out all sorts of commands like plot, assign, curve, and this was really fascinating to me at the time.
Mhm. And you started immediately hacking, or your first interaction with the computer was a game?
No, it was a game,
Okay.
obviously, yes.
Which
Yeah,
games
yeah.
you liked?
Well, apart from the computer games, I also had a Nintendo, but on the computer, I don't know what they were called anymore, but they were really fancy games I had. But I forgot it was something about space and astronauts.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Space Invaders or something like this, probably.
No, it was later. So Space Invaders was before. I'm
Okay.
not that old yet.
Okay. So you did QBasic. What was the most impressive stuff you did with the QBasic? You remember? So this was the first, some drawings you said with drawing curves.
Yeah. I think the most impressive thing I made with QBasic was a chat program. So my dad's computer and mine could be linked with a serial cable, and then we could chat. And we had a split screen, and I just sent back and forth the characters that we were typing, and it displayed immediately. So it wasn't you didn't have to send the message. You just could see exactly what my dad was typing, and vice versa.
Yeah. Now we would need WebSockets and whatever reactive
Yes.
programming to achieve the same, and you only needed a cable back then.
Yeah, it was kind of weird chatting on the computer when you're just 2 meters across, right? So it's the cable was 2 meters, so we
Yeah.
had to move the computers next to each other, so it wasn't really useful.
So what I have to say is, as I started study, I already told it on the podcast. There were students, and so all the computers were in one room. And what I observed, there were students 2 meters apart, and they chatted to each other. And I
Oh
say,
yeah,
why are you
those,
doing this? You can move your head around and just talk to the other person. You don't need the computer. No, but it's cool. So I mean, this is
it's
there were two
cool.
computers, two.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was one table, and they chatted back and forth. And I said, okay, this is nice to observe, right? This would be like scientific study what you are doing here. But so it's
Yeah,
not that
exactly.
strange. But what's had QBasic the capabilities of networking?
Well, it was very low level. You had to directly address the LPT for the parallel port or the COM port, so you could just send bytes to the port,
Oh,
kind of like in assembly. So it wasn't much more high level than assembly. It's not networking; it's just sending a byte to a port
yeah.
on the
But I don't think in my
processor
computer it was
level.
possible. Yeah, the ZX Spectrum was basic. I don't think it would be possible to interact with the hardware, except the pick and
Yeah, you
pokes.
can.
Okay.
Yeah, I forgot how it worked, but it was perfectly possible.
How old you were back then?
I think 12 maybe.
But this is crazy. So you built with 12 a chat which interacted via cable with the same loopback, and this is
Yeah,
crazy.
I guess my dad thought so as well.
And you did it. I mean, your dad help you, or you just did it?
No, I just did it. He
Okay.
just used the computer for emails and these kind of things. For no, emails didn't exist yet. It was Word documents and stuff like that.
Your dad was programmer.
No, he's a sports teacher, so he just had to create Word documents and these kind of things.
Okay. Yeah, now the conversation gets even more interesting. So with 12, you did your chat program with networking in QBasic, and what happens then? So what was your next challenge? With the QBasic or
At the,
whatever?
at the time, as a kid.
Yeah.
I think when I was 15, I got Turbo Pascal from someone. I don't remember who gave it to me, but I had Turbo Pascal, which was much more advanced. And I also started poking into assembly.
Mm-hmm.
And one program I wrote at the time, I discovered a lot of stuff about how assembly worked and interrupts. And I figured out that at the time with MS-DOS, you could call some interrupt routine where you can change the font of your BIOS.
Mm-hmm.
So for your current session, you could change the font. So I would write, I've written a font editor in Turbo Pascal with a UI and it was mouse capable and had some dialogues. Really low level and primitive. I didn't know about libraries and stuff like that. But with this editor, you could actually design a font for the 256 ASCII characters and then load that. So it would produce a little assembly program that would load the font. And now, well, you have your handwriting on an MS-DOS machine. Unfortunately, I don't have the sources anymore, so I can't. I would really love to see that again, how I coded it. It must be horrible spaghetti.
Yeah.
But it was really fancy and exciting learning all this stuff.
Why you did it? I mean, yeah, exactly. So was it you wanted to achieve something, or you just, this is interesting because with 12 or 15, you have a goal usually. You would like to be someone.
No, you don't actually. Okay. So that's the point. I now have kids and I see that and I really envy them. They discover stuff without a goal. They're just exploring stuff.
Uh-huh.
And when they explore stuff, they learn stuff and they want to learn new stuff. And it's just curiosity. It's just that.
Okay. But, interesting. But I mean, yeah, I get it. But what's interesting is you could also discover other things. Why computers and why assembly and why fonts. That's the interesting part. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to go back to the 80s. I mean, this was really a very, very interesting time with computers. It just started. And from what I know in hindsight, in the 80s, computers were really advertised in marketing to boys. So I was probably a victim of this advertising, of this marketing by Microsoft and IBM and these companies. So this was really a kind of a hobby that these companies suggested little boys would have, and not just programming and these kind of things, but anyway, computers and games and whatever.
Yeah.
So I guess I was just a victim of this kind of marketing.
Yeah.
To my personal liking, of course.
Yeah. I also think so because for me it was similar. Also, all the movies and everything was around computers, right? There was Star Wars.
So everything was cyber, right?
Yeah.
Cyber.
This would fascinated me. I mean, this is like a complete different world.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. This was because now, I mean, computer is more like a coffee machine, This is no more. Mm-hmm. This is not that the whole thrill or fascination is no more there.
Yeah, you can't even open them anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
At the time, you can open them and you can plug around and tear out the motherboard and replace it with something else, and that was fascinating as well.
Yeah. Okay. This is really impressive. I mean, with the assembly, what you did back then, and where you got the resources. Yeah, resources. Like the information from books or magazines. I mean, in one point of time, you have to know which interrupt does what.
The trial and error.
Okay, so I also tried that, with pick and pokes, but there was no result. Everything crashed frequently.
A lot of persistence, I guess. A lot of persistence, a lot of patience.
Okay, so how much time you spend with your computer with 15?
Way too much, obviously.
Yeah. A day? 2-3 hours?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Okay. So after Turbo Pascal, so was anything else with Turbo Pascal you did?
No, I think at the time then I was a teenager and then girls started becoming more interesting. So
okay.
I kind of put that aside to some extent. I still played video games, but I didn't program as much anymore, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. And you are located in Switzerland, right?
Yes.
Okay.
St. Gallen, Switzerland.
St. Gallen, so not far. Oh, didn't knew that. So I think every time I'm in the Switzerland, I have go through St. Gallen with the train. So this is Margareten, St. Margareten, right? No, and then St.
Yes, that's the other stop.
Yeah,
at
exactly.
The border.
Okay, and okay, so you did the Turbo Pascal, and then what happens after girls? I mean, the girls never ended, I would assume, but
yes, of course. I didn't abandon it entirely. I still was very interested in all of this stuff. So I decided to study software engineering. Well, it was called computer science at the EPFL in Lausanne, Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that for 5 years and then started working as a Java developer in the end. First as a PHP developer and then Java later on.
PHP, okay. And
yeah.
And after Turbo Pascal, which other programming language you learned, or was just Turbo Pascal and then you studied and then it was more or less Java, I assume?
Well, at the university there were numerous ones, but I don't think they really count. It's usually one semester of C++, one semester of whatever. But PHP was my first job. So during studies, next to the studies, I had a 40% job at the local web agency where we built a CMS. With PHP and MySQL mostly, and obviously JavaScript a little bit, but at the time most of the stuff was written in PHP. So that was 2004, 2005, when PHP had its, I'd say, high time when everyone was coding PHP. And after that, I went back to Zurich, back to the German part of Switzerland, where I had a job at a local company that did everything with Java. And I've been stuck with Java ever since.
Okay. With PHP, I also remember the time, and this was crazy popular. So 2004, 2005.
Yeah.
And they claimed, we don't need transactions. Transactions are just stupid. You don't need transactions. You can just do everything without transactions. This was the common. I remember this exactly because I was also approached by projects. So why you do all the transaction stuff? The PHP guys don't need it. And they also didn't have connection pools, what I remember. And then even Oracle provided prepared statement and connection pooling on the database side because PHP didn't like that or didn't have that. And what I remember in my workshops, PHP developers were deeply impressed by connection pooling. So this is what we'd have show them connection pooling or data sources. They were deeply impressed.
Yeah, it was a different world. I mean, it wasn't needed. I mean, in most of the cases, when you code PHP, you design a simple website with some interactivity, some dynamic stuff, but it wasn't really made for huge applications. You had to put yourself in the mind of what was before CGI bin, where everything was coded in C, which was really, really complicated and horrible and slow, and PHP was super fast compared to that and super simple and ubiquitous. And you didn't actually need these fancy concepts that maybe you needed in banking where everything was in COBOL or started being written in Java now. You just had to store maybe, I don't know, a blog post. And if you lost one, maybe once in a month or something like that, it wasn't maybe that bad.
Yeah.
So MySQL even didn't have constraints. Yeah. Right, so you had primary key constraints, but no foreign key constraints. You didn't have to check for integrity because usually your schema was very simple.
Yeah,
it's kind of it's a website, and MySQL can very fast build up a lot of connections. So I guess for normal applications, it wasn't really needed to have a connection pool. Everything was single threaded in PHP, so you didn't have processes, you didn't have inter-process communication, all that complicated stuff. You didn't need it. So websites.
Actually,
right?
This was the future, right? Because if you think about the CGI bin, you can sell right now as serverless.
Yes.
Then you don't have connection pools. Then also no transactions. MySQL you could sell right now as schemaless NoSQL actually.
Sure. Although now they all have these features, so MySQL built all these features.
Yeah, then you have to sell it first as NoSQL and then reintroduce the feature and sell it differently. This is what happens. So you have to reinvent.
But I mean, in the end, the question is, what is it for? What is it built for? And I think for the purposes that PHP was built, you didn't need these features. I mean, you didn't need processes, you didn't need inter-process communication, you didn't build complex systems with PHP. You built websites. And conversely, I don't think Java is still struggling with this. Java is still trying to be a website also ready technology, which I just think is not meaningful. I mean, the jOOQ website, for example, is built with PHP. Why would I use Java for that?
Yeah, my website is static page, not even PHP.
Yeah.
No, I'm even simpler. It's just
I know, but I needed some includes. I needed to include some common global variables and stuff like that. So because I needed includes, I used PHP.
Okay, you are right. But what happened with PHP in one point of time? they started to adopt all the patterns, and I forgot the frameworks. I saw in conferences they try to be like Java, and this is what this was completely crazy. So they had the enterprise framework with all the patterns. Okay, this is what I don't get at all.
But you see, PHP was built for websites, but then they started thinking, can we also build applications with it? And that's why they started doing these things.
Yeah.
Just like JavaScript was built for action listeners, right? So you should have JavaScript in on-change events and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And now they build entire websites with JavaScript only.
Yeah.
It hasn't been built for that, but well, that doesn't keep people from doing it.
No. Okay, so now you job with Java. So first, you like PHP or back then? I mean, you are fairly sophisticated now. I assume you like to work with Scala and then C++, then PHP comes out, you know.
Java was much better. I mean, Java is type safe to some extent. It has a compiler. It has a language specification. It is backwards compatible. It has a lot of things that PHP really lacked. And PHP kind of always felt like, we're just going to plug this in here and plug this there and see what happens. And then you had the most horrible things I experienced with PHP was, for instance, when we upgraded from 4 to 5, they changed incompatibly the semantics of the assignment operator. I mean, the most important operator was in PHP 4 was an assignment by copy, and then they changed that to be assignment by reference.
Okay.
Which is something you would never do, right? You would never change a language like that, but they did, and it broke everything. And we couldn't upgrade to PHP 5 forever, but we needed the features as well. So it was always like that. And in Java, it's completely not like that. I mean, today we're still suffering from the decisions 25 years ago because they won't remove things. They just won't remove things. So it's the other extreme. And PHP just broke things all the time. Maybe not as badly as Python or other languages, but it was still a different experience. And I preferred Java in the end. I liked PHP for its simplicity for websites, but I was more into building applications than websites anyway. So, for that, I really much prefer Java.
How you learn
already
Java?
At the time? I had some classes at university, but then at my first job after university, company just threw me in the cold water, I guess.
Okay. And you enjoyed Java from the beginning, or was it strange at the beginning? You know, with the Java C and the bytecode and.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone who's doing normal stuff ever gets exposed to bytecode.
Okay.
Right. So it's just completely hidden from you, and it usually just works. Also, garbage collection at the time. I mean, when I started Java, it was Java 1.3, and we just moved to 1.4.
Okay.
Stuff started working really nicely. I mean, at the university, I heard the stories about the early Java and how slow it was at some times, but with Java 4, everything was quite decent already. Yeah. And IDEs were really great. I mean, at the time, this was when Eclipse was really big. Mm-hmm. So that was, I think, at the time, it was the most popular IDE, and it was really sophisticated for the time. And I mean, you could just start coding Java stuff, and it worked really nicely compared to PHP stuff. When you do something complex, and I don't know the other languages, but I've had some experience with C++, and building and linking and everything in C++ was really complicated, and you had to write a make file. And in Java, it was quite easy, and even Ant at the time I thought was quite nicely designed.
I really liked Ant because it was simple.
I did, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't use it anymore today because it has a lot of flaws, but at the time I thought it was really nice solution, a declarative language that solves building complex things really nicely, even if it creates a big mess of itself. But you always have to compare things with what was there before, right?
Yeah.
So Ant competed with
I also use Ant. So Ant was, I had to say, it was obvious what happens, and as Maven 1 came out and some project used it, I couldn't get the points, like why are you doing this is slow. The Maven 1 was terrible with the XML based configuration and the Jelly. This was the programming language in XML, and for me, I never got it. It was like a fashion, and I was like, okay, go ahead. But and then Maven 2 came out. It was way slower than Ant. I still ignore Maven, and then they caught up. In one point, they were a lot faster, and then I was interested in Maven. This was also
yeah. It's hard to say when it really picked off, Maven. I mean, it's been some time. But really, at the time, Ant was really state-of-the-art compared to other options. But I guess today, Maven is the thing, and maybe we'll see how people transition to Gradle. I don't know.
Gradle, I think it was more popular, I would say 5 years ago. This was a huge, spike. Everyone asked me about Gradle, and now it just flattened out. So Gradle is there, and Maven is there, and no one is no more excited about build. So you can pick whatever you like, and you just build the stuff, right?
Yeah.
How it should be.
How it should be, yes.
What you did in the, when was it? 2006 with your first Java project?
Yes, 2006, yes.
Okay. So how long you spent with the company? What you did roughly? What was it?
With that one, I was for 3 years, 3.5 years, and I built a small team, a telecom solution where companies could check on their call detail records and aggregate stuff and do some reporting. It was mostly Hibernate based at the time, so Hibernate was in an early stage as well, and it was hyped, and we used Hibernate to store stuff, but I thought it was kind of slow for the purposes that we needed, because we needed reporting mostly. And but I got introduced into a lot of interesting concepts there already, and that was that one job. And then I switched jobs to a product vendor that built e-banking systems. They're still doing that, of course, but I've left them in the meantime. So I was there for about 4 years. And that company was more Oracle based, so they also did a lot of Java, but I think the bulk of their business logic was written in Oracle, either in PL SQL or in SQL. Mm-hmm. And they had a very interesting architecture, which I really appreciated and I learned a lot from at the time. So first off, most of it was written in SQL, and then the entire presentation layer was written in XSLT. So this e-banking system at the time was from the early 2000s, and it was just really, really well designed, in my opinion. There was absolutely no need to go with any hype that would go over the Java ecosystem like JSF at the time or whatever came afterwards. So it was just this old XSLT thing that was completely transformative, completely functional programmed, and no state, and completely stateless, and really easy to understand.
Was XSLT was for you easy to understand?
Yeah, it did take some time to get used to. I already had it at university, and I mean, but in the end, the programming model is really simple. You have a stream of XML elements, and you match them, you pattern match them, and you transform them to some other stream of XML elements, and that's it. You're done. And of course, there's the syntax. You can lament the syntax and complain about the angle brackets, blah blah. But I never cared about that very much, because I thought the programming model of XSLT and that of SQL, of course, as well, are very much similar. You always have complete statelessness. You have a functional programming environment. You're doing declarative stuff. You don't care about algorithms at first until maybe something is slow, but until then you don't care about it. You just care about how you transform your streams of data.
Okay.
And with that model, to me, it was really simple to implement a really even complex change requests from the customer. To me, it took a few hours, because you just have to tweak here and tweak there, and then you're done.
Okay.
No state transfer, not a lot of tests needed, because you didn't have side effects, never. And I really loved that.
What I remember recently is what you could do back then and still probably can. You could perform the XSLT transformations in browser. You remember that?
Yes, I remember.
You know whether it still works, but this would be a cool thing, right? To try it out, because you could actually output XML and in browser load the style sheet, and this was actually really nice, right?
Yeah, it worked well for some cases. Yeah, it still does. I guess you don't want to do it this way in the end, but because one problem with XSLT is because you can't have state, it's very difficult to have sessions and stuff like that. So you either have to hack your way around that, because sometimes you need statefulness. But for simple things, if it's really just a presentation, it could replace CSS, for instance. Yeah. So if you want to, instead of using CSS, you want to do everything with HTML, you can do it with XSLT.
But even with XSLT, you could actually, because, or you could, even better. You could, with XSLT, you could now read the XML, then create semantic markup, and you can load, CSS from the side. So just ignore CSS completely with XSLT. So you would just transform XML to semantic markup. So like, article, section, and so forth, something with meaning and metadata. And then you can load on top of that CSS and make look it nice.
Sure.
This is actually what you should do with your jOOQ page or not includes,
Well, the manual is already there. So the jOOQ manual is built with XSLT.
Ah, very good.
In the end, there's a huge XML document, and there's a few XSLT style sheets that transform it into a single-page manual, a multi-page manual, or PDF. At some point, it also transformed into EPUB, but I dropped that.
Not enough time to create a style sheet for EPUB, right?
Well, it broke at some point, and then I just left it broken, and no one complained, so I thought no one was actually reading it.
Oh, this is normal. So I've wrote lots of manual, and no one read it. So this is normal. In one project, it was a huge project. I was forced to create lots of documentation, and I say no one would read it. And in the middle of the documentation, I copy and pasted some stuff from science fiction story.
Oh yeah,
and no one noticed. No one noticed. With there was like a transportation system in the middle was started with UFOs and Perry Road and something. I found something on the internet and copy and pasted. Interesting. With the XSLT, what I wanted to mention is back then I was really fascinated by XSLT, and what I liked is Cocoon. You remember Cocoon?
I've seen it. I've never worked with it.
Apache Cocoon was like a publishing pipeline or kind of CMS system for XSL and XML, XSLT and XML, and FOP. I also had to use FOP to generate PDFs. So this was also, and I have to say, I just use XSL without thinking too much about that. I mean, it was very good, nor bad. It was just one tool.
Yeah.
So, and I knew it is possible, but I don't think I was very good on it. It just could, just creates output a simple page. So this is what I could do, right? Yeah. And what I remember, it consumed lots of memory back then. And the processing time was not that good, at least not with my tools. Like FOP was.
Yeah, I remember that as well.
Yeah.
Today we have the hardware for that. I don't think they've drastically improved the implementations in the meantime. It's not a popular technology anymore, so I don't think a lot of people are investing to improve this.
It will come back, right? Like SVG. Batik was huge in 2000, I would say 2 or 3, and now it's forgotten. Now SVG images are all over the place. So actually, with a little bit of hype, we could reintroduce all the libraries again.
You're right.
Okay, so you worked a little bit with Hibernate, and the next project was Oracle with no Java at all, right? Or where?
No, there was a lot of Java as well. So everything that had state, when there were JMS systems and surrounding systems and messages and stuff like that, was written in Java. There's a Java security layer in the middle between the database and the XSLT layer and stuff like that. But most logic was just routed through this Java layer and without any modifications. So the Java layer didn't actually do much in most of the cases. But there was also some Java.
Okay. I assume it was WebLogic or Glassfish or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
How did you guess? WebLogic.
Yeah, WebLogic.
Exactly.
But by the way, I really like WebLogic until the version 8. And after that, it became big and big. And one point of time, I said, this is just crazy. I mean, was way too complex. I assume your version was 10 or something like this?
I don't know. We actually didn't use anything from WebLogic except JMS.
Okay.
We just had to use it because the bank insisted on it. But I don't think we used anything. Servlets, of course, and maybe JMS.
Okay.
And all the rest, we could have deployed just the Java program with a main.
This is good. This is actually great. Great thing. So if you really just rely on Java, SE is the best if you can.
Well, of course, we needed servlets actually, so I don't think we could have deployed.
Yeah, but servlets is okay. I mean, because parsing the understanding HTTP is way too much.
No, you don't want to do that.
And okay, and you are still you left the company. When was it? 2000.
Yes. So at the time, I already started developing jOOQ. So once I left the company where I worked with Hibernate, I thought the folks there built a query builder around Hibernate. So at the time, criteria API was not a thing yet. Hibernate had maybe a few features to simplify where clauses, but they built something where they can build almost the same thing as the criteria API today with Hibernate. And I thought the idea was kind of neat. And when I left the company, I took a break for about 2 months and I experimented with the idea because I thought this could be done better. In a better way, in a more fluent way, with interfaces that cascade and return interfaces such that it really feels like SQL or like HQL. So at the time I decided I didn't want to base this on HQL. I wanted to base this idea on SQL because it's much more powerful than HQL will ever be, because SQL is a huge standard by now. And I created this library, and then I started the other job, and I wanted to introduce the idea at the other job where we did the e-banking system, and they said, oh, we already have that. We have something similar, and they also had a query builder. So I guess it was at the time in the 2000s where everyone built their own query builders in-house, which they needed for dynamic SQL, of course. I mean, if you have a lot of where clauses that are dynamic, and everyone has that, and occasionally maybe a join that is dynamically added, you need some way to protect everyone from SQL injection and syntax errors. So everyone builds a SQL builder then.
I also built one. It was called QLB, query language builder, I think. And mine was just one, I think 2 classes on one class with a builder pattern inside, So you could just say select. They were like select from where I remember the builder methods. And in the end, you can say build, which just concatenated, all the strings, which was primitive.
Exactly. So that's already a big win. So you don't get syntax errors anymore.
Now, okay. Now I have to find the source code and republish it again.
Right. And then you're one of hundreds of these ones, because it's really simple to do that for just select from where, and you actually need it, right? So if you have dynamic where clauses, you really need this protection from syntax errors and all the other waste of time. And everyone did that. So this was lucky for me. So I instead of donating my idea to my new employer, I actually had the time to do that, to continue doing that in my free time. At the end, it started growing, it started getting more interesting. And for IP protection reasons, I started reducing my workload at the employer to 80% and rewrote the entire thing again in version 2. So jOOQ 2 was born then. And a lot of companies started using it, and more. I thought this is
when jOOQ 2 was born. When was it? Which year?
I don't know jOOQ 2, but jOOQ 1 was born in 2006. So jOOQ 2 maybe 2008 or something like that. It was already quite adopted. So a lot of people were using it, not as today, but I don't know. I had a very busy issue tracker. A lot of people using it, and at the time there was also an alternative project called Query DSL. Which had a different approach. They abstracted over SQL and JPQL and other languages. Mm-hmm. So they abstracted over many things, and jOOQ, from my perspective, only should abstract over SQL. So at some point, they were mainly these 2 query builders in Java. Mm-hmm. And of course, Criteria API, which hardly anyone uses. From what I can see, a lot of people use it if they must, but they tend to prefer Query DSL.
Exactly. I would say the Criteria API from JPA. This is what I know.
Yes.
It is. We use it if we have to, and this is usually if you have dynamic, the where clause. If you concatenate for forms. So for this particular part, I force myself to use this because I cannot remember even how it starts.
Exactly.
And then if you have it, then you have it, and then anything else we just use with preprocessor.
Don't touch it anymore.
Named queries, exactly. Mm-hmm. So wait a second. I would like to interrupt you first. How you got the name to jOOQ?
The name, it's just an accident. So it stands for, the J is recursive. It stands for jOOQ, and then object-oriented querying.
Very good. And what was your very first working feature or first commit of jOOQ? It's always interesting, if you did something. What was it? What was the very first commit? Was it nights? Was it mornings? You remember the very first commit?
I don't, but I think it was one of the first ones was store procedure support. No one else did that.
Okay.
So if you want to call a store procedure with JDBC or with JPA, it's just a big pain in the butt, because you have to remember all the bind variables, input and output parameters, and
register parameters,
a code generator that could just generate stubs for store procedures, which was common practice everywhere else. So if you had a web service, you would generate the stub. If you had an RMI call, you would generate the stub. Why not the stub for a store procedure? Mm-hmm. Right? So no one did this, not even Oracle. Mm-hmm. Well, Oracle had a product, but no one knew it, and I think now it's deprecated. Okay, publisher. Mm-hmm. But for other databases, I don't think there existed a popular tool to generate stubs for store procedures. So I think that was one of the first features. And then, of course, select
from where. Do you remember SQL J? You know about that?
Yeah, I know it. I've learned it as well. And then I think outside of university, no one ever used it, but I've learned it at the university.
Okay, so I actually used that. I just tried everything out. So, and SQLJ is interesting. So
Yeah.
it's like annotations with SQL, which generated code, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I mean, Java never picked up on preprocessors like C did before. I mean, in the C and C++ world, this was done all the time. So you ProStar, Pro-C, how do you pronounce it? Pro-C?
Yeah.
With the asterisk. So that's just the same thing as SQLJ, more or less, right? So it's a good idea. For static SQL, it works nicely. You don't have to write the glue code, which is boring. So you can just pop in your SQL statement just like in PL SQL, like in the stored procedural languages. I think in PL SQL, it's solved really nicely as well. You have the SQL statement and it interacts with the PL SQL code, and you don't have to care about cursors and resources. You can just iterate a select statement, and that's a model I wanted to follow with jOOQ as well. So in the end, jOOQ it's kind of the same thing, the same philosophy as PL SQL. So you just embed the SQL language in the Java language, and it feels like it feels like Java is the procedural language with the SQL language embedded in it. So that was always my goal.
Okay. The Pro-C or a Pro-C++, what I actually started with that in my first commercial project was with that. Not true, but one of the first. And it was code generated, C++ code was generated from the SQL with the Pro-C, and then SQLJ came out, and Sun said, okay, this is like a preprocessor, and this is why I learned SQLJ to see, whether it is similar to the C++ stuff.
Yeah, it's a pity it never really picked up momentum. Yeah. It was a great idea, better than using JDBC directly in most cases.
You had to rewrite jOOQ to version 2 just because of IP protection?
Yeah, there were other reasons as well, but this is one reason. I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think my employer would have really minded. I really like them and they're still customers, but according to Swiss law, if you work somewhere 100%, then you actually don't own your IP that you create in your free time. It's kind of weird. So I'm not sure about the law in detail, but the thing is you're not supposed to compete with your employer when you're employed 100%, especially also because they have a right to your presence and to your performance. And if you work maybe 200%, 100% for an employer and 100% in your free time, then you're always going to be tired, etc. So it's kind of an employer protection law in Switzerland.
Sounds like slavery to me,
Yeah, well, it kind of depends. I mean, there must have been precedence cases, right? So maybe someone actually used all the knowledge they had attained in the employment phase, but actually didn't deliver it to the employer, but to themselves. I don't know. And then became competitors. There must have been a precedent for these laws. Course. So I just didn't want to run any risks.
No.
So I did this step.
Yeah, it's actually a good idea also to refactor. I assume if you start with something, it's usually not that great, at least in my opinion, what I start. And then if I rewrite it, I'm much happier afterwards.
Yes, and at the time there were almost no users, so I didn't break a lot of stuff.
Okay, so the very first version of jOOQ, how it worked?
The same as today, but the DSL was not as sophisticated.
Okay.
So it was a query builder, but I didn't have the idea of making it look exactly like SQL yet. So it was kind of a procedural query builder that did all the features that were needed, but it didn't feel right. So today, I think that's also one of the biggest problems I've seen with alternatives is that they get lured into thinking, oh, if I just name this function, I don't know, slice or whatever is a fancy name in Kotlin or in Scala or whatever, people will understand. And I think mixing these terms is really overwhelming. I always wanted to have everything look exactly like SQL. So if you know SQL, I mean, if you know with a K, if you're sophisticated with SQL, then you will understand everything in the jOOQ API right away. It will be exactly where you will expect it. You don't actually have to learn jOOQ. That was always my goal. Of course, there's always a caveat and there's always an edge case, but if you know the SQL has select from where, group by, join, whatever, you're just going to write exactly that in jOOQ, and writing and reading will be super easy. I think I've studied a lot of other query builders, and at some point, every one of them got sidetracked by some cleverness in designing alternative syntax for SQL. They all tried to fix SQL, and there's a lot of good reasons why SQL should be fixed. I mean, a lot of syntax is weird, but in the end, I thought, I'm not the one to judge this. I mean, if someone wants to write this kind of style of SQL, they have a SQL statement in mind, and they're proficient with SQL. I'm not going to judge them and say, oh, in my world, you have to do it this way. So that was the biggest change between jOOQ 1 and 2. To change the entire API. Well, the old API is still here. I didn't deprecate it, but there's a new API on top of it. This is the DSL API, and now everything is written in terms of the DSL that looks exactly like the statement you have in mind that you want to write in SQL. Mm-hmm. So this makes transforming statements back and forth a lot easier.
I'm completely with you. I would say if you like, to write a persistence layer, and SQL or a database is the reference. So just take the standard of the database and just build on it. If you introduce your own stuff, no chance, because your world, regardless how popular jOOQ is always smaller than the SQL world. And the SQL so this is absolutely the right decision. So and the mixing and matching is really bad. I really hate it because, for instance, I'm regardless whether I like jOOQ or not, but I don't like to invest too much time with a new library because already our conversation showed us that libraries tend to die. And why I should invest time in something which disappears in 1 month? But if I know SQL, I can build on the knowledge, and then I can use databases, and I can use your library. So then I don't have to invest too much time to learn your library. And this is what makes it, for me at least, more interesting, right?
And that's the other thing that I've always put in the core of the design of jOOQ is I'm assuming that if someone is using jOOQ, they are thinking in terms of database first. So they will always design the database first and design it really well with all the relational algebra and all the normalization rules, etc., that we know and love. And they will design a big system that is there to last. So I've seen a lot of big systems where the database is 40 years old, maybe. It evolved and it will never be changed. And maybe if someone on the C level says, okay, we have to use DB2 instead of Oracle now for some management reason. Okay, there will be one migration, but it will be the same kind of database they had before. They will not refactor it. They will just translate it. And it's really the core of this type of application. I mean, there exist other applications, of course. But this type of application needs a tool that accepts that the database is first. This tool, jOOQ, this product will never make the assumption that it will go first, that it will design the database for you. It will always assume you are designing the database before, and maybe it's 40 years old, and maybe it will still last for 40 years. And not even jOOQ is the thing that will die. We've all seen it, that people just migrate from Java to JavaScript.
Yeah.
Right? And they will change the entire presentation layer. They will change the entire business logic on the middleware layer, but they will not change the database. It's unlikely because data is so heavy and has so much mass, and the migration is so dangerous. It will put the business in a huge risk. Yeah. They will not change that. So whatever they're using afterwards, they shouldn't have to worry about any decision they made because of jOOQ, because jOOQ will make everything work that your database can make work for you. So, for instance, this has always been a big design goal in jOOQ compared to JPA, for instance. I think JPA is mostly surrogate key oriented, right? So you have an entity and you always have an ID annotation on every entity. And very rarely you're using something like an embedded ID or a natural ID. But it doesn't really work very well. So, for instance, you can't have more than one natural ID in SQL. You can have as many IDs as you want. You can have overlapping unique keys. It makes sense. I recently did a Twitter poll.
One question,
this is a really weird thought.
Before, you like SQL?
Yes, I love it.
I love it. And how good were you with SQL as you started jOOQ? Or
quite good, I think. Okay. Not as good as today, but quite good. I was tuning a lot of Oracle SQL.
Okay, and you liked SQL back then as well?
Yeah.
Okay. This was interesting because I wanted to find out whether you started jOOQ, because you hated SQL and you wanted, to just write something quickly.
To fix it.
Yeah. And now you like, okay, so for me now, jOOQ looks to me like as JDBC on steroids. So you have, a very convenient way to write performant SQL code, which is translated to Java. So if you like databases in SQL and you don't like to bother with anything else, you use jOOQ, which generates some Java code, and then you can use it. And this is perfect tool for, I would say, for SQL or database people, or how to call it, database engineers, how to call it, people who design database. What's the term?
I will say I call these people data-centric developers.
Data-centric developers who just would like
Yes.
to make their job with queries or whatever, and then just spend as little time as possible in Java. So you're just creating the SQL queries or whatever, and then you're done, right?
Yes. So jOOQ fixes one big flaw of SQL while not neglecting the good parts. So SQL is not composable, right? So the SQL language, especially if it's used as an external DSL, if it's just a string, is not composable. The syntax is a little bit different if you have a select statement on the top level or on the derived table or in a correlated subquery. You always have to adhere to slightly different syntax rules, which are a bit of a pain to remember, especially if you have to support several databases, several products. So if you have to support MySQL and Oracle, it's a little bit different. And jOOQ standardizes on the dialects, and jOOQ also allows for writing dynamic SQL. So I think dynamic SQL is something that you can really not do very well with the SQL language itself. It's really difficult. You can do simple dynamic queries, maybe with string concatenation or bind variable tricks. But if you have something really complex, dynamic joins or whatever, it's really simple with jOOQ. You will never have syntax errors. You will never have any issues. And you can have super complex queries. So I think some of the most complex queries I've seen with customers have 1,000 of lines of jOOQ code, which is crazy. 1,000 of lines of jOOQ code, and it's all assembled dynamically with maybe hundreds of common table expressions and derived tables and many joins, and all with if-elses in the middle. And I don't think this would be possible with any other technology, this kind of thing. So that's not something everyone has, but everyone has dynamic
maybe
SQL.
SQL J,
Yeah, try it.
What interests me right now, I would like to read from a table some data. What is the first step with SQL with jOOQ? So how to start with jOOQ? So
you have one object. That's the entry point of the DSL. That object is ubiquitous when you work with jOOQ. It's called the DSL context. There are two DSL types. So one is for static usage, and that's called DSL, and the DSL context is for dynamic usage when you want to run the query. So you will always set up your repository if you're using Spring or your DAO or whatever to have this injected for you. And from on that object, you just type select. Then you have various options like select distinct, etc.
And what is select is an interface. It's a method, and it will return another.
Yes, you never see classes. You always see interfaces. You don't know what's behind. You don't care about that. It's just an interface with a lot of select methods on it. And then you type that, and then you close the brackets, and then the next thing you want to write is from. So you type from, and then there's a method called from, and that's it. And then you continue building your SQL statements just like you would if it were normal SQL, and in the end you write fetch.
Okay.
And you get type safe results because throughout this DSL, jOOQ will remember what columns you put in the select clause, and it will remember, okay, you had 3 columns, string, integer, and long, and this will produce a record of 3 columns of these types.
And this is your record. So the result set belongs to jOOQ. You are not returning result sets. You are wrapping result set or whatever.
Exactly. So you can always access JDBC if you want. There's always a backdoor to access the low-level parts, but usually you don't. So you never see JDBC.
This is active record pattern. You remember?
You have that option. So if you don't actually project anything, if you don't have any expressions in the select clause, you can just select the entire table, and then you get a table record that is type safe. So there's a code generator that generates your entire schema as Java object as well. So you have everything available, and then you get that record, and you can modify it and store it back to the database. So for very simple CRUD operations, there's a solution as well.
Okay, but the code generator is an option. I don't have to use it, right? So usually I'm working with the builder.
Yes, but you're going to miss out on a lot of great features, especially type safety and a lot of advanced features. Like there's the possibility of doing implicit joins like in JPQL, like in Hibernate. You can write customer.address.city.country as a path, and that will generate joins for you, but only if you use the code generator.
Okay. So the code generator generates like the metadata from the tables, right? So do you know, like the builders, which you can use then dynamically or statically, right?
No, the builders are there. You can use the builder without that, but you have the entire metadata generated from the code.
And the builders are using the metadata behind the scenes, right? The generated
Yeah, the
metadata.
metadata is implementing the same types, but you can also just use strings. If you have for instance, if you have a completely dynamic database, you don't know the tables at compile time, you can still use jOOQ. You just have to you don't generate your data. You actually use it with strings.
Okay. So you have with jOOQ you have one entry point. With the entry point, it is like the context, and the context has the first
Yes.
interface with lots of methods which reflect one-to-one SQL statements. I can call
Exactly.
the methods. The methods return other interfaces with other methods which reflect other SQL statements as closely as possible. And then
Yes,
if I
exactly.
call it and call it at the end fetch, you remembering behind the scenes what I called. So the entire chain with metadata is stored somewhere. It is intermingled with the generated metadata from database, probably, right? One point
Exactly.
of time. Otherwise, you will be object, and now you know more. And you do some bytecode manipulation behind the scenes, or it's
No,
just
not at all.
cool. So there is no byte body, nothing.
No.
That's great.
There's a slight option. I mean, you can use a mapper that is built in where that uses a reflection, but otherwise it's all. There's no magic at all. It's all straightforward.
And
All
prepared
debuggable.
statement, you recognize that this was called
Yes.
twice, and you create prepared statements behind the scenes, or how?
There's always a new prepared statement being created because there's been this discussion a few times, and some JDBC drivers, for instance, the Oracle one has a prepared statement cache itself. So it caches the statement. The big work is not the creation of the statement on the client side, but on the server side. So you can use JDBC tools to cache stuff if you want to do that. jOOQ always creates a prepared statement and binds the variables for you, so you don't see that kind of thing. You don't have to remember bind variable indexes. You just place your ID in the middle of your where clause, and jOOQ will calculate the right bind variable index for you.
That's actually great. So what I suspected that they are using behind the scenes bytecode generation a little bit, but if you just plain Java and the code generator, you are connecting via JDBC, and with the JDBC metadata you get the information, and then you generate with XSLT, I guess, some Java code.
I have not thought about that. Maybe I should.
Yeah.
No, it's just a handwritten templating to generate the Java code. So you have options of connecting to the database with a JDBC driver, and then some queries on the dictionary views are run. Not with JDBC directly, but because that really doesn't work. But that's one option, or you can reverse engineer a DDL file with create table statements inside, or you can reverse engineer JPA entities. So there's also an option of using your existing JPA entities. If you're not that database first person, you prefer designing your database with JPA and you want to just use jOOQ for a couple of reports. So jOOQ can then use behind the scenes Hibernate to reverse engineer your entities and find out what the tables are and generate metadata from that. And there's also an XML format that you can reverse engineer if you want. So there are various options where you can pull your metadata source from. But usually people will use the JDBC version because maybe they have vendor-specific features like stored procedures, and there's no other way to represent them, so they will use that. And jOOQ will connect to that and find out what the procedure name and parameter types, etc. are.
Okay.
Yes.
What's your business? So can I buy support for jOOQ, or what? I mean, or it's just a hobby project from you?
No, it's not a hobby at all. It's been a hobby at the beginning, and then when I stopped working for that e-banking company, I created a company that licenses jOOQ. So it's now a dual licensed piece of software product that started out as being licensed commercially for commercial database support. So if you use Oracle or any other commercially licensed database, there are commercial drivers in jOOQ. If you use Postgres and other open source databases, there are open source drivers. So there's the jOOQ open source edition, which is Apache licensed still, and the commercial edition have the commercial drivers. But now, since about 1 year, I've started adding, slightly changing that business model. It's worked great, but I think there's an even better model that works better if there are premium features. So I'm adding more and more premium features for power users, such that also users that so far used the jOOQ open source edition can be upsold to have a more wholesome experience with jOOQ. For instance, the latest version now supports embedded data types similar to JPA. So you can have embeddables, but as I said before, in SQL, it's usually the case that you have overlapping sets of columns like constraints, and for instance, overlapping embeddables is a commercial feature.
Mhm.
Also, mapping all constraints to embeddable is a commercial feature. Or another commercial feature is the support for procedural languages. So if you want to have a while loop inside of your database, for instance, a PL/SQL while loop, and generate that, you also can do that dynamically now with jOOQ. So that's also a commercial feature. So in the end, I'm hoping eventually to also offer Oracle and SQL Server support for free again. Not sure if it's open source, but for free, and slightly shifting and moving the business towards offering premium features instead of basing the license solely on the drivers. But historically, it was only on the drivers, and that's the business that's been.
What do you mean by drivers? It means if I would use Oracle driver with open source, it will reject working?
Well, it just wouldn't work. The dialects are so different. I mean, in Hibernate doesn't produce very sophisticated SQL. It's quite simple with a couple of joins, so that's quite standard SQL. But jOOQ uses so many vendor-specific features behind the scenes, so I don't think you would get jOOQ to work, the jOOQ open source edition to work with Oracle. I mean, you can try it, of course. Nothing prevents you from trying it.
No, but for simple table would work, but for some...
Yes.
Yeah, this is what I wanted. But because you mentioned drivers, you don't have specific jOOQ drivers. It means I cannot use the open source jOOQ with a Oracle database because what is lacking the translation layer, right?
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. Okay, this now I understood what. Okay,
it's lacking the code that's needed. Yes, so the code base is almost the same.
This is a good model because what I notice is more and more people are moving from Oracle to Postgres. So therefore,
they pay me now, and they will continue paying because they're so happy with the product.
Yeah,
but it's actually really good for migrations. I mean, I've had a couple of customers. For instance, the case was a SQL Server to Postgres, and they were already using jOOQ, and they had maybe 500 SQL queries or even more, and they just had to switch to dialect and maybe tweak two queries that didn't work out of the box, and then everything worked.
Exactly.
So for them, migrating a complex application with a lot of SQL was no problem at all for the application.
This could be actually like an enterprise version of jOOQ as well. You could generate the metadata from one database, then you have everything what you need, and then you can apply the same on the other database, or a database mapping tool as feature.
You can already do that today and for free on the website. There's a translation tool on the website.
You have to hide the free feature and sell a commercial feature. This is what we're talking about business.
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
Business is working smoothly. I'm currently focusing on getting more market adoption.
Yeah. Yeah, this is very good because, after my podcast, you can just, sell your business and go to Hawaii, I would say.
So I'll give you 20% on that then, if that's the case.
How we met, I just wanted to say, the first time I saw you at the Rapperswil, CH Open workshop.
Yes,
days.
You're right.
So we say just hello.
I remember.
It's like a nice guy. Who is he? I said, okay, this is the jOOQ guy. I said, okay.
That was for trainings, right?
This
the training days.
Yeah, it was like one workshop day. I did properly microservices, and I assume you did something with jOOQ.
I don't remember. I saw your talk. I mean your training. You displayed a couple of Java Enterprise Edition features and NetBeans and stuff like that.
Yeah, probably. This is what I usually do. Now I Visual Studio Code or whatever. It's always the same, but the IDE is very, in my talks, the title. But so I said, okay, nice. And I wanted to talk with you, but I had no time back then. And then I saw you at a keynote, Jack's keynote.
Yes, I remember that too.
And this was great. I say this was one of the best keynotes I ever saw because
really?
I remember the slides with a huge amount of annotations, and comparing it to your jOOQ. It's like this is actually funny and entertaining. I have no idea whether it was keynote, but I assume it was the largest.
It was, yes.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't intended as a keynote, but the keynote speaker couldn't make it, so they upgraded me. It was really great.
This was actually a good idea because usually the keynotes are not that great, I would say. But this one, I was amazed, and my talk was after yours, and I say, and now I'm completely disturbed because this was so nice. I thought the entire time about the thing, right?
Sorry for that.
No problem. And jOOQ. So what people ask me always, what's my opinion about jOOQ? And this is why I wanted, to talk with you, because my opinion is always similar to yours. By the way, what I heard is if you can just do something with Java SE, go ahead. If it's not enough, my world is Java, Jakarta, and microprofile, Quarkus, Helidon, stuff like that. So then we can, expand on that and do with that. And if you're happy with JPA, we are fine. And a jOOQ special thing before if projects where we have a lots of JDBC, jOOQ could be an option. The only problem is what happens when after this podcast, you become so rich, say I don't like, to have the version 5. So the dependency is the problem, the only problem, what I see. And
on the other person?
Yeah, but
try using any Oracle or Google product, and tomorrow they will kill it.
Google is
it's not an argument. It's not one. I understand the concerns, but ultimately, you have the same risks with every product. It's always total cost of ownership management.
Yeah. What is good in your case, because you're not using any, byte body and byte manipulation stuff, I say it could be easy to understand. If something happened, someone could pick the open source edition and try to fix by her or himself, right? So this is the option. What you can do.
The paying customers also have this option. With every commercial license, you get the source code and the right to modification. A lot of customers patch jOOQ, the commercial edition of jOOQ. It doesn't feel different from the open source edition. They have all the information they need. They can continue maintaining it.
Yeah, this is what I meant. So if you can, if it is... you mentioned Google, for instance. Yeah, this Google Web Toolkit. I did exactly the same arguments. There's technology from hell. If this breaks, no one can fix that. But in your case, what I understood is, is a chain of builders. It's a more or less straightforward Java code. More or less, of course, it's complicated because there's lots of knowledge behind. But if you would disappear at one point of time, someone else could pick up and continue with the jOOQ, right? So it's not like...
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, this is what I wanted to hear, right? From what the opinion is. Because similar questions I get regarding Lombok all and over again. It's like, okay, what happens if the two guys just lose interest in Lombok? This is not that unlikely. And then we have a bigger problem, right? And or not we. This is in longer term projects. This is me as a consultant. This is just fun, migrating back and forth. But what I see is, more and more clients are really tired with constant migration. Not in Java, more JavaScript. They are very sensitive already. You don't not again another framework. And this is an interesting discussion always. So
I think it's important to check out the track record. jOOQ has a track record of 12 years now, and it's been maintained continuously and very backwards compatibly for 12 years. So that's not going to change. On the other hand, something new will pop up all the time. Before jOOQ, there was other options. After jOOQ, there will be other options, and it's not like you're betting your money on some really, really complex application server that runs your business. It's a library. I think it's always important to see these concerns within the context they're in. It's a library. It can be maintained by anyone. It's not like if you patch it, you're just going to corrupt your entire data and your business goes bankrupt. It's really not that big of a problem. We replace parts all the time in complex systems for many, many reasons. And a vendor going out of business or losing interest or whatever reason is always a risk with every vendor. And I think it's just much less of a risk with a library than with a server.
Yeah. And if
I wouldn't...
If I can buy, support from jOOQ Inc., as long as the jOOQ exists, or what is the name of the company?
Data Geekery.
Data Geekery.
Geekery, like
Geekery. This is a cool name. So always buy support from Data Geekery. Then this is the solution to the problem, actually, right? So if I have a problem, I go to you, fix it for me. Perfect. But running an open source version of something and hoping, that in one time the bug is going to be fixed could be an option. If you dedicated time, to understand that. So I would say in what I said is what I'm telling in my clients in larger projects, either you have time or you have money, right? So if you have time, you can just, download the entire open source world, play with it and fix everything by yourself. But then you have spent a considerable amount of time and some money, maintaining the project. Or pick and choose as few as possible critical libraries and buy support and let maintain the guys, the library.
Absolutely.
And with the servers, you're absolutely right. So for me, I performed a code review recently, and there are lots of, the direct dependencies to the server. For me, is no-go. So if we have application servers with runtimes, you only allowed, to use these Jakarta or micro profile APIs. Otherwise, it's pointless. If someone uses direct, Glassfish or Whitefly dependency, which happens really, I say, hey, in the next version of the server, we have to migrate the entire thing, or you forget it won't even start, because now in Kubernetes and whatever, sometimes the images gets upgraded and without any knowledge, right? So this is different world. But you're right. So if you have server and you are directly dependent on the SPI, then for me it is even worse.
Yeah, and I didn't even mean that kind of server. I actually meant the database server, right? That also manages your data.
Yeah.
In the end, right? So in the end, these risk discussions always have to be put in context also of the value you're getting. So according to the lines of what you're saying is, I can't solve this problem with anything else because this thing here solves this problem so well for me. I'm saving so much time. So compared to the risks that it introduces, it's just definitely worth it.
Exactly.
So it's always you have to put risk and value in balance. And I think, given that jOOQ is pretty much the only product right now that is maintained so actively for dynamic SQL, for instance, if you have really complex dynamic SQL, you could do it with Criteria API, sure, but you will spend a lot more time for a lot less dynamic SQL than with jOOQ, for instance. So you will get that much more value. And the risk, it's maybe there, but for the last 11 years, it was insignificant. So I think you can move much faster and provide more value to your own customers. And then that definitely justifies the risk.
Yeah, the risk is increasing because, the older you get, the higher the risk. But you are now.
Yeah, but I get wiser as well. I make better and more informed decisions.
Yeah, you look right now like, I have to say, the jOOQ keeps you young. So like a 25-ish or something like this, right? So
really?
we have 25 years to go with jOOQ. But you are absolutely right. The risk is there. But before I write, complex criteria queries everywhere, jOOQ may be the option. But then the consequence would be I would buy support. But
I totally agree. I can't disagree with that.
Just forget about you. Just I say about, because picking for such, I would say we would like to save no time on playing then with open source version and hoping that it works is strange, because we are doing this to save time, and money. And I assume if I have a commercial support and I ping you, say, okay, I have a problem here, you will help me in, I don't know, in certain amount of time or whatever, or fix the problem or whatever. And in open source, it really takes time. This is what I'm doing as consultant. I see it all, all the firefighting projects or whatever. What usually happens is not that they pick jOOQ. They pick a library, like the last library of the month from Java magazine, which doesn't make any sense. It's just there. And they forgot about that, and then it disappears or whatever, and then we have a problem. So I have lots of such a project. So I'm very sensitive with external dependencies, and if there is a sensitive dependency, then external dependency, sensitive dependency as well, then I would ask the developer, what is now the essential added value of the library?
Of course.
If they say, of course, usually there is not. So
I agree with you.
Recently, a microservice project, very fresh one. They built their own logging framework again, and everything's like, why you are doing this? We don't need it anymore. Exceptions, mapping, and whatever. And jOOQ is just another box what they like. And this is why the discussion is so interesting. And I'm completely with you. And you mentioned JavaScript. JavaScript, the same story. We delete everything except some essential libraries, and some libraries are just great. Moment.js, if you have to do a lot of date operations or whatever, or there's the D3.js for charting. You cannot just build a chart. This is a jOOQ, something like this. You have no crazy SQL operations or a lot of data. You are the database-driven person. It seems like jOOQ is the right option, right?
Yes. And again, I completely agree with you. Even I've recommended customers to not use jOOQ. You have 5 SQL queries and 2 tables in a really, really small service. Why just use JDBC directly? JDBC can do that.
Yeah.
I appreciate you love jOOQ and you absolutely want to use it, but here maybe don't.
Yeah.
Use it in the next project.
Yeah. And what I also see, just opinion beyond jOOQ, what I see in projects from architectural perspective, who are in deep trouble is there were a project and are still who try to build perfect database schema and perfect object model. And this, in my opinion, cannot work. So what you should do is either try, to focus on database or focus on Java. If you normalize the database to the nth level, what you will have to do is you will get lots of objects which are interconnected with joins and not really convenient to work with, regardless whether they are your records or my JPA or whatever. But so therefore, what we try to do either, say, okay, what is the master? Is the database the single source of truth or my objects? And sometimes we focus on objects and we pick JPA and it generates crappy database, but it's okay. If it's fast enough, no one cares, right? And otherwise, if we start with a database, then we generate from database JPA, or we use jOOQ for more complex stuff, doesn't matter. And then the database is the single source of truth. So we would try, to keep the database first, or database first approach, right? What's your opinion about that?
Well, I think I've not yet seen a case where the Java first approach would have been the right choice. Okay. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I haven't seen it. In my experience, but I think really you have to decide, yes, which side is your driver for whatever reason. I mean, in my opinion, when there's a lot of data, it should always be the database. But as you say, sometimes your domain model is really complex, but you have only a little amount of data. It's not a big risk if you have a crappy database, so you can migrate it. You don't care about if it's stored in MongoDB or in a relational store, especially at the beginning of a project, maybe even it's not that important. But I'm a bit wary of this simply because I haven't seen it. So maybe this is just anecdotal evidence. But I think in a large percentage of projects, if you go database first, you're doing yourself a service.
Okay.
Because one thing, and that's our fault as vendors and database vendors and tool vendors' fault, is that it's still very hard to get it right. You have to write DDL statements. You have to use Flyware or Liquibase to version control your database, because it's crazy that we version control our entire code base, but not our database schema. How is that even possible? We really have to be diligent with that. And if we version control also the evolution of our schema, and the next jOOQ versions will focus more on these topics and integrate better with Flyware and Liquibase.
Nice.
If we version control the evolution of our database schema along with the evolution of our client code, everything will be much, much better. And once we start doing that, it's really simple to go database first. So there's an initial overhead, but I think it pays off big time every single time. If we actually spend the time at the beginning of the project to think a little bit more about our domain, about our logic, about our relational model, and about the evolution of the model, because yes, it is unknown. Yes, some things cannot be known in advance. But if we prepare for evolving that stuff once we go into production, then the system will be designed better. Now, again, I agree with you. There's probably a couple of cases which I simply haven't seen where the other way around is going to help you more. But yeah, I've worked mostly with large systems, and with larger systems, it's never a good idea.
You're right.
In my
so larger system, pointless, but pointless. Also, it's impossible to do such a thing in larger system. But what happens, I also work with several startups, and this is what we are doing. And if you're starting right now with Java, what you get is a couple of, let's call it microservices, with independent databases. So the database instance is no more that critical. We just use it as a data dump, And
we will all really regret that.
No, I mean, I don't like microservices, and but in this particular case, it makes business sense because it's really independent pieces. It's not like we are building microservices to build microservices. This is in such smaller projects, it works. In one point of time, you will have to maintain the database a little bit more because the code which is generated is suboptimal, but it works surprisingly well for 1 to 2 years, I would say, and then. You will have to do something with FlyWayDB or whatever. And we use JPA, and the developers were happy. So this is not like I told them. I was like, we can switch to whatever you like. And they say, okay, no, it works well and very surprisingly well. And they were happy, so I know it works. But in all other critical projects, it never works. And in some project, it is just, we are not even allowed, to touch the database directly. So we have to speak with
that's the other
whatever
three.
data-centric engineers, whatever. But cool. What I would like to do is to invite you back in one point of time and talk about microservices, more design. But where people can find you on the internet. So you have, what is the link to where you can buy licenses from you or commercial support and
jOOQ.org.
jOOQ.org. Okay.
Yes.
And your Twitter. Do you have Twitter?
Yes, Lucas Eder.
Mm-hmm.
Just without any characters. Lucas Eder in one word.
So Lucas Eder without characters. I know what you mean. Without underscores.
Underlines.
Exactly. Every separators. Okay, perfect. Thank you. It was fun. And I hope we clarified, what is the myth behind jOOQ. And now I understand also better. And if you use jOOQ, buy support. Without support, you can toy around with, I don't know, with your own database. But for the serious stuff, buy support, right?
Perfect.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam.